Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar, Journey Mapping for Improved Program and Service Design. This webinar is being offered by the Health Foundation for Western and Central New York. And in particular, we have participants from the Foundation's Call to Action program, as well as current fellows and alums from the Foundation's Health Leadership Fellows program. If we have other guests on the webinar today, welcome. My name is Aaron Krolikowski, and I work closely with the Health Foundation on two initiatives reaching older adults and young children and families. Those initiatives are called Aging by Design and Co-Creating Well-Being. A brief reminder that this webinar is being recorded and will be made available later today. The website at which the webinar will be made available is www.acroadvice.com/journeymap. And you'll see that link a little bit later on in today's session. Today's session will be about customer journey mapping. And the webinar introduces the concept and technique of journey mapping, and will share ideas on how to use journey maps for improved customer and client experiences. We'll start by discussing service design, which is a practice that deals with shaping and tailoring your programs or services to fit the mold of your intended customers and clients. The next section will describe exactly what a journey map is, and will describe the different pieces you'll need to create your own journey map. I have a few excellent examples of journey maps that we will take a closer look at, and then we'll take a look at a template you can use to create your very own journey maps. We'll finish up the webinar with any questions that pop up during the course of today's session. If you have a question during the webinar, please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen. You can find the icon in the bottom option bar. And if you click that, a chat window will open up on the right side of the screen. Please feel free to use it as you need. Again, a reminder, we will have time for questions at the end of the webinar today. So what is service design? Service design is an approach to the creation of consciously designed services. And these services tend to be very empathetic to user needs. Service design is a practice that helps to innovate, which what we mean by that is to create new services or improve existing services to make them more useful, usable, and desirable for both clients and organizations. That last bit is really important because services are only effective if they work for both the client, patient, customer, whatever we might be calling them in your specific case, your specific journey map. They have to work for the user and for the organization providing it. Service design is all about finding a sweet spot that creates a great user experience, which is often represented as the intersection of usefulness, usability, and desirability. Sometimes people refer to usefulness as utility because what we're really talking about is what the service does or what it offers the customer at a functional level. What core problem is it actually solving? By usability, we mean how easy it is to interact with the service. And desirability, what emotions or feelings, how pleasurable is the service interaction for the actual user? And for staff at the organizations providing it as well. Can't forget them. The goal of service design is to get a program or service to fit the user like a glove, so to speak. You may want them to make repeat visits, or maybe there's some certain desired behavioral outcomes that you're going for. And in some cases, in many cases actually, people may only seek out your service because of how it makes them feel. If they have a great experience, they'll be back and they'll tell their friends about it. If they have a terrible experience, a not so great experience, you may not ever see them again. And success might be based on repeat interactions and continued visits. And it's always important in this case to focus on the service, not the product, which what we mean by that is focus on the experience and less on the outcome. A good service experience is likely to produce better service outcomes. Now, there are 5 core principles of service design that journey maps fit into and help to activate. These five principles include being number one, user-centered. Services should really be experienced through the customer's eyes. Should be co-creative as well. So all stakeholders involved, from the customers to the program staff to leadership, should be included in the service design process. You may need to create multiple journey maps for a variety of different personas. Talk a little bit about that in a few slides. Journey maps and service design more broadly is all about sequencing as well, and visualization. The service should be visualized as a sequence of interrelated actions. In journey mapping, we call these touch points. Again, we'll talk about that in a few moments. And service design is also all about evidence, both the scientific evidence that you may read about in papers, scholarly papers, but also about the real world on the ground evidence that you have from clients about whether a service is working for them or not, or why, and getting to a stronger understanding of why that might be, why it may not be working. And then finally, service design tries to be holistic. And we try to consider the entire environment of a service and in which it's being provided. So we talked a little bit about, I've mentioned journey maps a couple times so far, but this is a good time to give you a sense of how they fit in with the overall practice of service design before we jump in. In many ways, service design thinking is like a toolbox. And there's a lot of different tools that you can use. And if you've interacted or participated in any of the Foundation's other initiatives, Aging by Design and Co-Creating Wellbeing being some of them, you may have used some of these tools that you see in front of you. But customer journey mapping is one of those tools that you can use to bring your work into alignment with the five principles that we just looked at. So what is a customer journey map? A journey map is a vivid and structured visualization of a service user's experience, with strong emphasis on the words visualization and experience. Really want to look at what the customer, what the user, what the client is experiencing. I really like this, this cartoon to the right because while you as the service designer, the program staff, the grant writer, leadership, we often have, let's say, higher level understandings of what the program is and what it's doing, and where the client might be in the middle of that program design, that program plan. But in all actuality, the needs of our clients, our customers, are much closer to the ground. And so where we think they are doesn't always match up to where they actually are. And so customer journey maps really do help us to clarify the user experience and then improve from that point. There are four key elements of journey maps, and we'll get to these in just a moment. But those are the persona, the customer, the client that we have in mind, the touch points that they go through, the personalizations that we add to the touch points that they go through, the interactions that they have, excuse me, and the emotions that they experience at each of those touch points. And journey maps really are, you've heard me use the word touch points a couple times, but journey maps are really focused on touch points. And these are the points where users interact with the service in the most direct manner. And we use these touch points in a sequential way, using evidence, excuse me, in order to create a journey. And these touch points can be personal, face-to-face interactions. They could be virtual interactions with a website, maybe a phone call. Sometimes they may be interacting with your service while they're driving to work. It could be, there could be many points in their journey and many points of interaction, including physical trips to a building as well. But the use of touch points allows us to break down the service into individual stages, which allow us to really uncover a little bit more about what is actually happening from the user's perspective. Now, what makes the journey map special is that it takes those touch points and then elaborates on them with this other evidence that I mentioned a few moments ago. You need to create the persona to go through the touch points, and the persona itself will help you frame what those touch points actually are. And you'll need to make sure that you incorporate real world interactions with the people that you work with your clients, with your staff, with your users, to get a better understanding of the emotions that they feel at each of these touch points, as well as those personalizations, which we'll talk about, quotes, and other just experiences and tasks that people are going through at each of those touch points. So here we have an example of a journey map. You can see very obviously that it has the 4 key elements we just described. It has a persona, referred to as Michael, touch points, which are the key action points that Michael will go through in order to accomplish his task. Emotions, what Michael might be experiencing or feeling at each of those points, and that those emotions are connected in terms of like an emotion line you'll sometimes see in the when we talk about journey maps. But connecting those emotions with a line often helps us understand that there is a gradient there and that there is a change going from one state to the next. And then in addition, the personalizations at the bottom really try to bring those emotions to life in the context of the touch points that you see above. Now, at the level of the persona, Michael is trying to find contact information for an agency or elected official. And for our call to action participants on the call, some of you may be working on projects that are about finding information or connecting with an organization. So at the, at the ground level, a journey map can be developed to really look at how does somebody find my organization. So it doesn't have to be, that 30,000 foot view. We really want to bring that experience right down to the ground, looking at how people interact with you and your organizations. The touch points that you can see below Michael's persona, these are identified, described, and visualized. Emphasis again on the visualizations, but the visuals don't need to be that elaborate. Usually a simple sketch or an icon of the communication channel being used. That's usually enough. But those phones and the laptops and the website, those are also pieces of evidence that that is how demonstrate how the user, how Michael is experiencing that specific journey. Below the touch points, as I mentioned, is an emotion line that demonstrates how Michael feels at each step, and you can see the personalizations that are there that help to give the reasoning behind the emotions. Journey maps are very useful in solving a few key problems that all of us face in our day-to-day work. It can help to identify, number one, key pain points for both staff and clients. And we have to remember that many of our programs and services were partially designed or maybe completely designed not in the real world. Sometimes in offices, sometimes sometimes in conference rooms, sometimes in the halls of government where certain rules and regulations are built. So just remember that a lot of what we might be doing on a day-to-day basis was designed with hopefully the best intentions in mind, but we always want to adapt those programs and services to fit, to better fit the needs of our, the lives of our clients, the lived experience of our clients. So identifying those key pain points is a key piece to keep in mind. Journey maps also help to better understand customer needs and can empower staff to align internal operations with those needs. And I think staff empowerment and using client perspectives and client experiences as a way to effect change within an organization is often one of the best strategies, because it's the real evidence of the people that you're working to help and serve. So that's something to always keep in mind, is that customer perspectives, client perspectives can also be very useful in empowering staff to align operations with those needs. And when we have those forces working together, it helps to strengthen a dual focus on both the deliverables or outputs of a service and the holistic experience a client has while going through it. And at their heart, journey maps also help to build empathy with clients, which is one of the most fruitful areas you can have in terms of finding those tangible opportunities for improving the quality or effectiveness of your services. It really is, in many cases, all about relationships. And if a client or customer uh, trusts staff members and trusts the organization enough to share critical and negative and honest feedback, those are usually uh, the as I mentioned, the most fruitful areas to find those tangible opportunities for improvement. And it's always important to remember that happy clients are easier to help, and happy clients sometimes create happier staff. All too often, a bad client experience can be transferred to staff, which really doesn't help anyone. I think this visual is really helpful in understanding how those bad experiences can be directly transferred and have that direct impact. Unhappy clients don't have to be as common as they might be. And I'm not saying that all of you have unhappy clients, but we all know what an unhappy client experience can be like, not just for the individual, but for everybody in the office or at the organization. So we really want to try and understand what usually makes for an angrier or unhappier experience. One of those is unexpected occurrences, so things that just sort of pop out of nowhere. And the perception of being not in control. I know a lot of what we try to do within journey mapping and service design, human-centered design more broadly, is really empower clients, empower users with information and the knowledge they need to successfully navigate whatever service they're focused on. So the perception of not being in control can easily be changed with appropriately delivered information. And so that's a big one. If you feel like you're in control of a process, you're going to be much happier with it, and you're more likely to experience success. Being overly dependent on others can also be a big reason for an unhappy client. And often that does come down to the question of empowerment as well. If you feel like you always have to go through a middle person to get something done, that can definitely create frustration, especially when schedules don't align or maybe modes of working don't align. And as I just mentioned as well, lack of information can really be a cause of unhappiness. It's the same reason why you might look at the GPS on a long road trip, looking ahead at the turns coming up, even if they're 3 hours away. We're all like this. We all want to know what's coming, and clients are no different. And of course, the big one that makes us all a little angry now and then, no matter where we are, waiting, lots and lots of waiting. So if we can, increase the efficiency and effectiveness of our services, get things moving a little more smoothly, streamline the interactions, we can reduce the overall amount of waiting that we all have to do within any particular process. Now, journey maps also naturally lead us to think about improvements. And in particular, they can bring up questions like, how can we create an environment where clients are less dependent on staff? How might we make information more readily available? How can we use the language of the customer? And when we refer to the language of the customer, this can include things like, are we using jargon in our materials that make it almost illegible to people? We have to consider the reading level of our clients as well. Not everybody may have graduated high school. Not everybody may have even gone to a formal education system, especially for, let's say, organizations that might be serving recently resettled refugees. So there's always that question as well, but speaking of refugees, of actual languages that are being used. Maybe we're not actually using their language, but then also a reminder that visual communication is one of the easiest ways to share information, which is why journey maps, you'll hear me consistently saying there's an emphasis on visuals. You want to sketch it out, you want to use arrows, you want to use emojis or some sort of visual that communicates what's going on. And if there is text, it should be personal and it should be limited. So the visual communication, visual language is one of the most universal. We don't want to forget that. We also want to ask questions about maybe, how might we explain what's going on, or how might we empower clients again to know what's going on? And are there better ways that we can publish, not just share knowledge, but publish that knowledge to both clients and our partners? For those of you who are involved in call to action, some of your projects do reference or focus on sharing information and sharing data across many different organizations. And so you can definitely use a journey map to model how that knowledge or how that information is being shared in a regular, consistent, and comprehensive way. Okay, so now we know a little bit more about what journey maps are and how we can use them to improve the design of our services and programs. And the first piece to consider when creating a journey map is the type of client that you have in mind. Now, you will probably already have at least a vague idea of the service you want to take a closer look at, and the client persona is the best way to frame or put parameters on the service. There's always a lot of different directions you can go, and the personas help to sort of draw a user-shaped box around that service. And so personas do refer to the target group, the audience or the market that you have in mind, and personas should be the type of people or clients that you have in mind that can express desires and frustrations about a particular service. One way to think about this is to build different personas around your mainstream clients, the ones that come in, get it done, and go on with their day. You may also want to consider building personas around the client extremes. Think about, where do the complicated days or cases come from? Where might social determinants of health come into play? How can you build services that account for some of those different challenges that people might have? Whatever the persona you choose, you'll need to keep it brief. The persona should include a visual depiction of the person, and of course you want to add a name, the age, location, and a few other relevant details. This little sample persona is from a marketing firm overseas, but they have created a very simple persona named Harry. Just no more than one sentence describing who Harry is, and then a few key details on his demographics. You'll see as we get into a little bit further on into the process how other people have built their personas as well. And you already have the example of Michael, which is a one-sentence persona with a specific task that he was trying to accomplish. Now, the next piece, after you create the persona, you will want to focus on your touch points. And touch points are the core pieces of the journey map. They're typically ordered sequentially and visualized from the client perspective. Often, these touch points, when they're visualized, they may show the communication channel that is being used. And of course, the way we want to think about touch points is to break it down to almost a tedious level of detail of what the client or patient or customer is actually doing. And we typically have three time periods with which we think about touch points. We'll get to this a little bit more in the future as well in a few slides, but we think about pre-service, during the service, and post-service. So there are activities and touch points that are happening with your client, with the client before they actually interact with your service. And so we always want to consider what's going on before that interaction takes place. And then after they leave your office, or after they have the main set of service-related interactions, what are they doing after the service? And if we forget those two sidebars, the pre-service and the post-service, we're not considering effectively the entire service journey that a client goes through. So that pre-service, post-service is really important, and you'll keep seeing that coming up as we take a closer look at some journey maps. Personalizations. After you create your persona and after you create your after you create your touch points, it'll be important to start collecting personalizations. These are thoughts, words, dialogue, often recorded verbatim or paraphrased sometimes if needed. And these personalizations, depending on how in-depth you want to go, these could be written. You could also collect audio, video, photo personalizations, In Michael's journey map a few slides ago, you saw that it had a picture of him and his coworker. And personalizations really need to be firsthand perspectives from clients. So I can't emphasize this enough, that once you figure out what your touch points are, you really want to go out and start talking to people to get those firsthand perspectives from them, to find out, what are they saying? What are they thinking? What are they seeing? What are they experiencing? And then that will help with the next step, which is emotions. But just keep in mind that the emotions really do need to be brought to life by the personalizations, which will, as I mentioned, incorporate client perspectives at each of the touch points. And as always, you want to keep it brief. So make sure you go out to interview clients or customers. At the beginning, 3 to 5 is usually enough to bring enough life to your service, to your journey map. But it's a good place to start. You really don't want to go more than 5 without, I guess, going back and revising your journey map. You'll get a lot of really good information from those conversations. You want to record key points and quotes, and write them on a piece of paper, or maybe you do have an audio recorder that you can transcribe later on. And then add the highlights of those interactions, the ones that really stuck out, the eye openers. Add those personalizations, the highlighted personalizations, to the journey map directly. Here's an example from Technology Meets Culture. I believe it's a consulting firm, but they created a sample journey map for a housing program with their touch points at the top. They have some emotions there, and you can see the personalizations under each of those icons. Moving on to the final piece of the journey map, are emotions. And while you can do emotions and emotions and personalizations kind of around the same time, I like to encourage people to add the emotions last or near last, because you really want to start that process of interviewing for your personalizations before you articulate what overall emotions people are feeling. Emotions really should be one-word descriptions. Directly from clients is usually the best. Asking them how they feel at that particular touch point when they're waiting in the waiting room, or meeting, how they feel when they're meeting with a particular service provider, so on and so forth. And again, visually, we like to communicate this, so we like to illustrate it often with emojis. But emotions are used to summarize the overall reality of a touch point. As experienced by clients. So you need that touch point, you need the persona, you need the personalization to really get that one-word overall summary. And it's important to remember that if clients are experiencing negative emotions, these are the best opportunities for improvement. If you can move somebody up a level, up 2 levels, that often will have a tangible impact on how likely they are to succeed in your program. It's important to keep it brief as well, as with everything else with journey maps. You want to ask clients or customers directly how they feel, as I just mentioned. You can use emojis or colors to depict emotions. Some journey maps you'll see do change the color depending on the emotion of that specific touch point. They change the color of the touch point. But a resource that I just wanted to share is Plechik's Wheel of Emotions. This wheel gives you a lot of different one-word emotions that you can use as you think about what clients might be communicating, especially if they don't give you that one-word emotion. This whole wheel is a great resource when it comes to trying to figure out what people are trying to communicate. Now, as always, you can use emojis, and this is probably the easiest way to communicate that emotion. And I've just shared a little inventory of different emojis, but I think everybody on the call probably could open their phone or do a quick Google search and find thousands of emojis that they could pick from. So definitely feel free to use these resources, go use other resources in terms of emotions, but just remember that emotions are the overall summary of what a client is experiencing at each touch point. So they'll often come at the end of the process of building the journey map. I wanted to share a few conventions to keep in mind as you go through the process of creating a journey map. As almost with every journey map I've ever seen, I think with every single one, you do want to start on the left and end on the right. The journey maps are also temporal, chronological, sequential. We've been talking about the sequencing and following, one after the other, and you can see that in the pathway model here. Sometimes services are a little bit more complicated, so you can also see the flowchart model in the visual, but the reading is still going from left to right, and the direction of the arrows and the inclusion of arrows often helps to delineate that. So keep that in mind. Arrows and going from the left to the right is a way to highlight that direction, but it doesn't have to be linear. Now, I also mentioned the pre-service, service, and post-service touch points. Just a reminder that you will see these as we move into some examples. And one of the key things to remember is that the ability to compare journey maps across services and sectors is one of the things that makes the approach so useful. So as you create your own journey maps, try to keep a similar look and feel to the other journey maps you may have seen before, the ones that you'll see during today's session. A few tips to keep in mind in terms of best practices. You may, as I mentioned before, you may need to create journey maps for multiple personas, but you don't have to go for the nicest looking maps at first. Get everything sketched out as best you can. Napkins work, the back of copier paper works. Just get it out, get it sketched out, get your ideas out on paper, and just remember that you can always refine the visuals and the map afterward. You're going to be constantly revising, so you don't constantly revising the map and treating it as a living document, going through iteration. Your understanding of a service is definitely and invariably going to change and evolve. And so this, the more rough sketch that you have, the easier it is, the easier it will be to change that as you move forward. And then finally, you want to invite and consult as many stakeholders as possible and as many stakeholder groups as possible to continue bringing in that feedback and getting a 360, more of a 360-degree perspective of your service. Now, in addition to conventions, I wanted to share some common missteps that people often make when they create their journey maps. And so you want to avoid these. You want to make sure that you're talking to actual customers. Many people, when they make a journey map, make the mistake of not talking to actual customers, and then what they have on paper doesn't match the actual experience. So if, once you try and get that journey map in front of people, engage with them at their at those specific touch points, not doing those things will severely limit your ability to create an effective journey map. Another common misstep is to design the journey map based on a single stakeholder or group. Often we can have very vocal individuals or very vocal stakeholder groups, but it's important to really think holistically about who is involved in the process, who is involved in the service, and how can you bring them in or engage with them at a specific touch point to learn more about their experience and their perspective. Some people also forget to include emotions and personalizations, and there's no persona, and so the service will be represented just as a series of touch points. That is just, again, one piece of the journey map. So you want to make sure that you're not limiting the map just to the touch points and bringing in those very important user perspectives and user framings. It's also important to not view the service as one size fits all. And that again goes to the idea of making multiple journey maps, or at least creating multiple personas that may experience the touch points in a different way. We are probably all guilty of this at some point, but forgetting to recognize that there are other people that may be experiencing the service differently is just something we need to keep in mind as we seek to improve or design new services, improve existing services or design new ones. It's also a common misstep to forget about your own point of view. Again, goes to the idea of talking to actual customers and creating multiple personas. We all have our own intrinsic biases. We have our own experiences. You may be a staff member trying to improve a service that really gets on everybody's nerves. And so you bring in a lot of baggage and a lot of experience from maybe the staff perspective. And we always have to sort of check our baggage with the lady at the desk when we're creating this. And we have to forget we don't want to forget about our own point of view. We want to recognize that it's there, but really open up space for clients and customers to share their perspectives on how they actually go through the service. Actively listening to a few different clients about how they're experiencing the service, and suspending your own point of view, suspending your own judgment will not get you to forget about your own point of view, but will get you to understand it from a different perspective, which can be a very rich undertaking. Now, finally, another common misstep is once you have the journey map, your first draft of the journey map is forgetting to ask for feedback on it from clients. This is a show and tell kind of exercise. So once you build the journey map, you want to take it out and show people what you've done and talk to them about the process and get their ideas for improvement. And down here on this slide, I just have a quick note that journey maps should incorporate a range of customer and stakeholder perspectives, and a reminder that it is your job as the designer to compare these perspectives and find the common touch points and the common emotional values that people bring to it. And if you have questions or you need any help in terms of collecting that feedback, I've included a basic feedback grid here, which asks a few questions like which would structures feedback, the process of collecting feedback, into four different areas. You know, what do clients like? What would clients change or improve about the service? What questions do they have, and do they have any new ideas? And if you're talking to clients, it's often helpful to draw that grid right on a sheet of paper, maybe with those symbols, just to remind you what you're asking, and write down their comments verbatim. And once you collect that feedback, you might actually have some great new starting material for the next version of your journey map, or the next journey map you need to create. So just things to keep in mind, and hopefully if you need it, hopefully the basic feedback grid comes in handy. Now we're going to take a look at a couple different journey maps. I call it journey mapping in action, and these are some what I have found to be world-class, best-in-class examples of journey maps put together. Now remember, your first journey maps don't have to look this nice. I believe a graphic designer put these together because they are really well put together. But sketches, you can sketch everything out. Sketches are one of the most valuable pieces. You can make it look pretty later. But this is from one persona, one person that is experiencing a service called the Minute Clinic. And this comes from a designer named John Davis. And you can just quickly looking at this journey map, you can see that there's a simple persona, Liz Washington, little information about how she's feeling, and then a quick personalization about what she says about Minute Clinic itself. You can see the pre, post, and during service period touch points. And those touch points are not only described with 1 or 2 words, but there's also a visual that goes along with each of those touch points. You can see how the designer put dotted lines between each touch point as a way to separate them. And then you can see the emotion line. There's no emojis here, but they do have on the left side of that scale, there's a heart at the top and a thundercloud at the bottom. And you'll see that the journey map template that I share with you follows the same convention, but that the emotion line is followed throughout each touch point. And at some of those touch points, the highlighted personalizations are included, which are you can see are actual quotes from clients, maybe even from Liz Washington herself. And then at the very bottom, you can see just a little bit more information. She is a return customer, but There are quotes, things that she thinks, things that she says, things that she has to do. These are the personalizations at the bottom of this journey map that bring it to life. So again, you want to make sure that journey map has those 4 key points: the persona, the touch points, the personalizations, and the emotion line. And those are the 4 pieces that will allow you to compare your journey map to other people's journey maps, the journey map of one persona or one client, and you can compare it with the journey maps of other clients. Taking a look at another journey map, also created by the same individual, John Davis, for a different Minute Clinic client. Again, you have the simple persona, Tim White, and he is feeling tired, sick, and irritable. And again, there's a little personalization there to tell you a little bit more about him. And again, you look at the top and you can see the pre-service, the service period itself, and the post-service period, the touch points that are very simply named, and the icons that help to visualize each of those touch points. Personalizations are down below at underneath the emotion line, and the summary of their journey and how they experience it is summarized by that emotion line. And again, this designer does a great job of bringing in those personalizations at really key emotional points. In particular, in the waiting area, that's where you see his emotional experience really dive down. And again, that would cause somebody to ask a question, why? And maybe Tim White doesn't really like the waiting room being so crowded, especially when he's sick and irritable. I think we all might be able to relate to that a little bit. Okay, I'm sharing one other example of journey maps in action, and this is not the Minute Clinic experience. I apologize for the little typo there, but this is about a visitor experience to a place called the Exploratorium. And the Exploratorium is a museum of science, art, and human perception that was set up by a scientist named Oppenheimer, and it's in San Francisco. And it's all about experience and perception and how that changes our understanding of the world. And so they put together a really great experience map that looks a little bit different than the Minute Clinic journey maps I just shared. But you can see that there's a pre-visit period, so a service period that happens at Exploratorium, at the museum itself, and then post-visit touch points that take place after the actual visitor leaves. You can see that the touch points are kind of integrated on this one into the emotion line, and it shows kind of what the visitor is experiencing at different points. And then down at the bottom, you can see the types of tasks that the person is trying to accomplish and the questions that they might have at each step. Those questions are the personalizations, the actions and the touch points, and the visualizations are all there as well. So hopefully you find this one to be a useful, slightly different example of a journey map, but very similar nonetheless to the other ones we've seen. Now, in the process of creating your own journey map, there are a few steps that it's important to take. Number one, you want to focus and choose your persona. You'll need to summarize the knowledge that you have about that process. Summarizing knowledge includes identifying the different stakeholder groups that you want to talk to, thinking about the different personas that maybe you do need multiple personas, and coming up with a plan of action to collect those. The next step after you summarize that knowledge is to really go out and start interviewing clients and interviewing stakeholders in the process. And once you've started interviewing clients, that's really when you want to start creating your first draft of the journey map. You might have an idea of the touch points, but you really don't want to put everything together on paper until you've actually spoken with people. And once you have that draft journey map created, it's a great time to take it back out to a few clients and stakeholders. Maybe they're the same, maybe they're different from the ones you spoke to before. But that process of collecting feedback will help you improve the journey map even more and identify those areas for service design improvement, quality improvement, or improving effectiveness and efficiency. But if you do forget the steps you need to take, I encourage you to come back to this particular slide because it really is a step-by-step reminder of what that process should look like. Now, for those of you who are involved in call to action, I have included, and anybody who's on the webinar as well, I have included a journey map template with 5 steps that you can follow in order to create the actual template. Now, remember the last slide I showed were those steps that you should take. When you get to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 5th step, create draft journey map. This is where the journey map template comes into play. You don't necessarily want to start with this one unless you've already spoken to clients, you've got some good records, some good interview notes you've taken, so you can start putting this together. But you really want to wait until you're at that drafting stage to pull out this template. And the template's available at www.acroadvice.com/journeymap. And there's a lot of other resources available at that site as well. But this template asks 5 key questions. What service will you map? Again, you have that vague idea. It'll ask you to describe the client persona, to think about your touch points at the pre-service, service, and post-service periods. And then it'll also ask you to include those personalizations and the emotions that you've gone out and collected. So it's a simple 5-step template in order to come up with the journey map, a draft of your journey map. But always remember, sketch first. Don't use the template, do the sketch, go out, talk to people, and then the template it'll be a lot easier to fill out the template. It is a printable 8.5 by 11 page, so it should print right out from a standard computer. But I do note that you will need Adobe Acrobat Reader to use the template. So that is the bulk of the webinar for today. We have gone through the main points that I mentioned we would go through today. We talked about service design at the beginning, gave you a lot of detail about what a journey map is and the different elements that we need to create a journey map. I shared a few different examples of journey mapping in action and gave you the tools, the steps you need and the tools you need to make your own journey map. We're at the last piece, which are questions and sharing a few resources. But before we get to that piece, I just wanted to share this key takeaway slide because it does include the key elements, that persona, touch points, personalization, and emotions, key elements you'll need for actually creating the journey map, and the key steps you should take in terms of engagement. You want to focus the persona, summarize knowledge, interview clients, interview stakeholders, draft that journey map, and then collect feedback. And you can improve your journey map from that feedback. And I have a dot there to just demonstrate that you can keep going and keep improving and continuously creating journey maps to identify those areas of improvement and act on them. A few resources that you may want to think about. There's a great online resource called the Service Design Toolkit, and this web link is available. This is available via a web link at acroadvice.com/journeymap. And the Service Design Toolkit has case studies, toolkit materials, templates, and more that you can use. If you don't like the service design template, the journey mapping template we have on the AcroAdvice site. You can also use another template, the Customer Journey Canvas. And this template is available in English, Spanish, French, Polish, German, Korean, and Portuguese. So it's a slightly different template than you've seen. It's more of a canvas to help plan out a service design project. But that template is available in multiple languages, and the resources that they have on the broader website are also very, very helpful. Then if you want to access any other readings or resources about service design, you want to learn more about journey mapping and some of the other tools in the toolbox, you can also visit the Interaction Design Foundation's website. And there's a link on the AcroAdvice site that'll take you right there. I just wanted to take these last few moments to share some information about other initiatives from the Health Foundation for Western and Central New York. In particular, the foundation itself has a variety of really interesting programs. Is a regular grant maker in Western New York and Central New York. It's the Buffalo and Syracuse areas, and then 8 counties surrounding those. So it covers a large area, and also has informative blogs, research, and more. So if you're interested in learning more about the Health Foundation, you can go over to their website at www.hfwcny.org. And 2 of the initiatives that I mentioned today that the foundation has been working very hard on with many different partner organizations and partner funders across Western and Central New York include Aging by Design. And our project site, agingbydesign.info, has a design thinking toolkit, how-to blogs, and more. And Aging by Design was designed specifically to improve and design services and supports for older adults. And the other initiative is Co-Creating Wellbeing, which is supporting children and families through trauma. And at the Co-Creating Wellbeing project site, we have a variety of engagement tools in multiple languages, self-study resources, and more. So all of these different websites here, the Health Foundation, Aging by Design, and Co-Creating Wellbeing are excellent resources if you want to learn more about human-centered design, service design, and some of those tools in the toolbox that I mentioned earlier. With the last 10 minutes in the webinar, I'm going to check our chat box to see if we have any questions that have come in. But I just wanted to take this point to say thank you to all of you who joined today. This webinar will be available at the acroadvice.com/journeymap website. And the recording will be made available later today. If you do have any other questions or want more information about this or other projects, you can get in touch with me directly at aaron@acroadvice.com. My information is in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. And yeah, here are some discussion questions for you. And I'm just going to check our chat box to see if any questions came in throughout the session.